You ready? Maybe. All right, all welcome to this committee meeting of the Environmental Science and Policy Committee. We're just continuing on from our workshop that we've just completed, so we're just going to pretty much carry on for there, but we'll just go through apologies. We have apologies for this meeting. Matua Edward Allison, who's got other priorities around Matariki, and we wish Edward very well in hosting the dignitaries for the Matariki in Otako. And also an apology from Karen Coates, who is at our workshop, but she's had to shoot away to some other engagements in Wellington. Also, just like to note that Councillor Methven has to leave around 12:30, and Councillor Forbes has to leave around 2 p.m. Welcome, Councillor Laws online. We don't have a public forum that we know of. Can we have somebody please to confirm the agenda? Thanks, Kate. Second to that. All those in favour say aye. Declarations of interest. We'd just like to remind everybody that if you have any interest to declare during the period of the committee, just to excuse yourself. We don't have any presentations at this stage. So we'll just have confirmation of the minutes, the last minutes of the Environment, Science and Policy Committee that was held on the 20th of March. Someone like to move that? I can move those. Someone like second. Thanks, Helen.
I'll just note under item 3, presumably it is Councillor Noon, not Councillor Scott, who's a trustee of the Cozy Homes Charitable Trust.
Well done. Yeah.
Okay, we'll make that amendment. Thank you. Are you happy?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Summerall for seconding. Any questions? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Again. All right. Thank you very much. We don't have any open actions from the last committee, so we can pretty much move on to the agenda for today. So we've got a series of papers here, which is continuing the background work, the background science and work that's what's been going on, but sort of pretty much from our time we started off when we were in Balclutha, and it's just moving on from there. So we got papers around state of environment, annual reports, etc., and then carrying on with some of the biodiversity stuff. So it's a pretty full agenda, but some interesting read. And I think at the end of the day, we probably just need to start at the top and work towards the bottom, eh? We're going to try and do the still the state of environment type reports, the first two, 9.1 and 9.2, prior to breaking for lunch. So the first one is the state of environment air quality trends. So these are the report on the air quality trends between 2005 and 2023, and a summary of the key findings. The report is for noting. This report's been written by Sarah. Welcome back, Sarah. You've been busy this morning. And we have Anita and the assistants. So thank you very much. I'll throw to Sarah.
Thank you. So this is just a updated SOE trend report for all of our PM data, and it was done slightly sooner than the SOE needed to be done, which is every 5 years, just in order to provide like an up-to-date starting point for the airplane review. So yeah, we discussed the results earlier this morning, but basically across the board all of our sites are improving except for Alexandra and Balclutha, but we're still not meeting the NESAC in our sites either. So happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions on the paper? I guess we pretty much covered most of it earlier this morning. So, well, Alex,
we did cover most of those questions this morning, but just so that
people who might be listening to this understand a bit more. I wonder if you'd go into a bit of detail for me about how NO2 sits in it. And I know we've got NO2 mostly from cars, and it's only a very small portion of our PM 2.5s, I think. But there must be some other impacts from vehicular emissions that aren't captured in there because they're not a measurable particulate.
So NO2 is a completely different pollutant compared to PM. This report is focused on PM, but for NO2, we are considering, we're hoping for future monitoring for that. And yeah, sorry, I'm not too sure I understood.
Sorry, no, I've got something written here which I'm actually going to go back to. It makes more sense than I was trying to make there. So we've monitored NO2 in the past. Is it a different system of monitoring from PM monitoring? It is.
Yeah, it's a completely different instrument. So we have to purchase new instruments if we want to monitor that.
And so that's why we don't have permanent NO2 monitoring, because it's different equipment.
Back in the day when the standards first came out, we looked like we were compliant with those when we first monitored, and we were also compliant with those when we did some periodic monitoring in 2021. So there hasn't been the impetus to monitor NO2 just because we've been considered compliant, but now that the standards are changing or the guidelines have changed, we probably want to do some more monitoring.
And our last monitoring, just give me one more second, our last monitoring was a long time ago, 1990s, so things have all changed since then. And so I'm wondering, given our focus on improving air quality, should some of our attention be moved to vehicular outputs, the whole lot of them?
Well, the only thing we can do is monitor for NO2, and we can use like traffic count data to figure out where we need to do that. And the NZTA have a network of passive monitors that are all around the country, and there's some in Dunedin and one in Queenstown, I think. So we can sort of use that as a guideline to figure out where we need to monitor.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Alexa. Michael, you have a question, Councillor Law?
I do. I wasn't there for the earlier meeting, so I'm at this one, and I'm reading the public document that's in front of me. The executive summary on paragraph 3, and then I'll take you to table 1, which is my page 10. The executive summary says that the Alexandra airshed has degraded in recent years, and it just carries on a little bit about that. And then if I go to table 1, the number of National Environment Standard air quality exceedances for the key indicator sites, and I look at Alexandra, and I see that for 2005 to 2016, there were anything between 22 and 74 exceedances. And then I look at 2017 to 2023, and I see that there were very few. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so these are presented in different columns because they're two different sites. And our first site from 2005 to 2016 was in an area of town where all the pollution accumulated, and so that's why we're seeing a lot more exceedances there. Unfortunately, that the land that site was on got sold, and we had to find a new site really quickly. We moved something like, I think it's like half a K down the road, and these are the exceedances that we're seeing here. So there's quite a lot fewer, and that's just because there's so much spatial variation in Alexandra, and we've just come out of that area of like the highest concentrations. That degrading trend is actually an analysis. It's not an analysis on the exceedances, it's an analysis on the monthly averages, and that's kind of what has come out from the recent trend analysis. And it's showing a degrading trend, but further, like when we looked further into the seasonal trends, it doesn't look like that trend is being driven by a winter trend. It sort of looks like there's something happening in the other seasons that is causing that trend to look like it's degrading. However, it's only like 7 years, so we actually need like further few years of data to confirm that.
Really? I'm looking at this and thinking you don't have a problem in Alexandra. And yet your text on the executive summary tells me that you do. You're measuring two different things. What you're saying is, on the one hand, oh, we think the trend's deteriorating on a monthly basis. But when it comes to exceeding the national standard guidelines, there are less than 6 or less days a year in which that would appear to occur. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. But we're not allowed to have more than one exceedance a year, so we still do have a problem.
No, we don't. If you go and compare it with the 10 or 11 years prior, when you were getting, despite the spatial difference you're talking about, 74 in 2008, and you compare that with last year, you've got 3. I would say that's a pretty dramatic improvement.
Right, Michael, we'll just try and have questions for a bit. Sorry.
Well,
We'll
there's
just
the question.
try and have some questions about you. So the question's been answered, and that we had 6
It
exceedance.
hasn't been answered adequately. That's why I'm asking it again. And how do you compare 74 to 3? There's the question. And tell me that air is degrading. Seriously, these are stunning figures. The difference between double digit for 2005 to 2016 and then single digit for 2017 to 2023, even if it's only half a kilometre down the road, would suggest surely that air quality is in actual fact not at dangerous levels in Alexandra in the way that it used to be.
Thanks for that, Michael. We'll move on. We've this was pretty extensively covered in the workshop, but we'll just.
I don't care if it's covered in the workshop. This is a public meeting and I'm asking the question.
Questions from Gary and I think it was Alan, right?
Sorry, the equipment, it's the same equipment moved to the new site? Or was it new equipment?
It was the
New
same
site?
equipment.
Same equipment, set up in the same parameters.
Mhm.
Right, okay, cool, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, cool. Sorry, I was reading elsewhere, but I assume that one of the I've got 2 questions. I assume that the change in data for Alexandra was because of the new location, so we were not comparing like with like. And did you say that to Council Laws?
Yeah, I did explain that the site had been moved and because of the difference in
Yeah.
spatial variation.
So you can't, it can change to 0, and and the question is just how valid that new data actually is, and that's and the jury's out on that yet until we get sufficient data.
Well, yeah, we know that the old site is still carrying on probably in the realm of this number of exceedances. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Council Laws, not a lot's actually changed.
Well, no, you don't know that at all because you're not measuring it. You haven't measured it since 2016.
But I do have 2 ears, and I listen to the advice.
No, we're not in the debate here.
Okay.
We're in questions.
My question is referring to the associated report, page 45. It's page 31 on the associated report, and it just says 2 interesting sentences, of which I have a question to follow, Mr. Chair. It says, there is evidence that replacing older burners with more efficient ones has had a positive impact on reducing emissions and consequently concentrations, full stop. However, this has not been enough to meet the NESAQ limit for PM10 in many Otago towns, and further actions would be required to achieve this. So I was just, through the chair, maybe a question to Tom or Anita. What are the steps forward from here based on those 2 sentences?
What page is that? Sorry.
Yeah, it's page 31 of the Equality Trends report.
Yeah, so I've got that page 45 of
Yeah,
Being Diligent,
on
and
Diligent,
it's
yeah.
the first paragraph of
Yeah.
the discussion, second sentence.
Yeah.
So this is part of the evidence base for the EAR plan and the EAR strategy that we're responding to, and you'll be provided with some options in terms of what you might like to do for all of Otago and for individual towns in terms of how we respond to that stuff. We've just had a workshop and that will be that information is publicly available, just in terms of what management options are available for each town. And there are ways that the modelling shows us we can get to NES compliance over time.
Yes, and is there a time frame in terms of where council may have to make some difficult decisions in terms of, actions thereof based on data?
Yeah, so we're just putting together the timeline, a revised timeline for the air plan and strategy. It's been impacted by staff resources. We hope to have that to you soon, but the air plan review is happening now, so that decision will be soon. Some point next year, we'll be starting to shape that up.
Okay, sometime next year. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Brian. Any other questions?
Yep,
Gary?
I go again. So sorry to continue on around Alexandra, but so we were at 65 Ventry Street, which is where the countdown site was. And then for across that 10-year period, we started at 42, we ended at 38, and we were up and down to 74, 22. And then in our analysis of that, we said that there was no trend. And then we moved to 5 Ventry Street, which is right down at the Alexandra Primary School, and sort of more into the CBD, so if you could say a CBD for Alexandra. So I remember seeing in the previous meeting that up closer to the step, or where Alexandra steps up from the lower level to the next level, around that Royal Terrace area, there was quite a band there that we'd identified as this is sort of almost like a cloud sits at this point here, and it's obvious that that contour change means that the lack of airflow around Alexandra means that it's going to get caught there. So it was, to me, it was quite straightforward. And then so we moved down to this other area, but we are saying that we can conclude that at that site it's degrading, but yet we've started at 3, we've only gone as high as 6, we went down to 2, and this year, or last year, we were at 3. So I'm just, for me, I know I said it in the workshop before, but this is actually the public meeting. I'm concerned that the degrading label for this is a little bit misleading with the lack of data.
Well, firstly, you can't really look at the number of exceedances and sort of say whether it's you can look at them and say whether you can see whether it's improving or not. In this case, you can't really tell. So when we do the trend analysis, that does this. The way we do the trend analysis, we deseasonalize it. So we take out the impact of the meteorology, and so you're left with what is kind of just like not a flat line, but you kind of end up with it tells you what percentage it's either improving or degrading, and improving and degrading, those are just words to indicate whether the trend is, the concentrations are going up or going down. And so this did show that for those 7 years, which has high uncertainty still, it looks like it's degrading, but we really need to confirm that with future data and possibly future analysis, because it does seem like those the degrading trend is coming from a non-winter sort of source.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess the key bit to consider here is there's 2 pieces of analysis. There's a table in here that looks at your number of exceedances, and that gives you a sense for how bad the air quality problem in Alex or any other township is.
Yeah.
And that's one feature, but that's not the data that the trend is run on. The trend is run on average data across a wider period of time, and so we have a slightly different data set there. It's all laid out in table 2. The conclusions that Sarah's drawn here are pretty simple. There is numerically there is a degrading trend on that new set of data out in Alexandra. However, that data set is relatively short in the scheme of trends, so we have a low level of certainty or low level of confidence around how accurate that trend will be. And that's where Sarah suggested a few extra years of data would be useful. And then on top of that, we have a known relationship, but not a really well-known relationship between two sites because we had to shift sites quite quickly. We didn't get a period of overlap in terms of monitoring, so we don't understand that relationship perfectly. And so there's a range of uncertainty there. And what we're suggesting is that while there's a slight degrading trend numerically, there's also a good chance that it's not degrading. However, there is a really low chance that that trend is improving, and you still have a number of exceedances occurring in that area. So that's how we wrap that package of information together and frame it for decision making. We'd say that there is an uncertain trend. We'd say that there are exceedances still occurring, and we know that the number of exceedances occurring in the worst part of Alex would likely be higher than the numbers that are stated in this sheet, because we know we're not monitoring in that worst part due to not having a site available. And I think when you put that information into context, it gives you a kind of broader picture and helps you to understand what you might need to know in terms of future decision making for the air plan.
So because we are going to be doing a new air plan next year, and the variance is shown here, how prepared are we going to be? How robust is the data and the decision making evidence we're going to have because some of the solutions that are likely to be proposed are, the worst case scenario might be no wood burners in Alexandra.
So I think we've pretty clearly outlined the limitations of the data set that we've got available to us at this stage. And we've also outlined what it would take to get to a better place in terms of more time. And I think those things should be considered when factoring in your level of ambition when it comes to decision making and other bits and pieces through the air plan. We have the information we have based on a range of historic decisions, levels of funding, all of that sort of stuff. And we've interpreted it to the best of our ability to be able to give you as clear a picture as possible. And while there are limitations, we can say with confidence that the trend's not improving, and we can say with confidence that you have a number of exceedances occurring in that place regularly.
Supplementary, please.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks.
Yes, Michael, you can go now.
So how long before you get sufficient statistically valid information before we could make a policy decision?
I think you have the information now to be able to continue to make decisions. We would have a better trend data set in a few 3 to 5 years' time.
And the second question is it policy? I understood it be policy sitting around this table for the last 3 terms that you try and put your monitoring equipment in the worst place, right? So the place that is likely to be the worst in terms of exceedances, you try and put your equipment there, correct?
That's correct.
So after you moved from 65 Ventry Street to 5 Ventry Street, was that the second worst place in Alexandra?
It was just the closest available site. It can be quite difficult to find appropriate sites in terms of what's already near the site and distance from buildings, distance from trees, distance from roads, etc. So it was just the nearest available site.
So you didn't follow policy in going to the worst site after you quit 65 Ventry Street?
We went to the best available site at the time, and since then we've conducted further studies. Yeah, we're best for monitoring available site. That happens to be the site. Since then, we've conducted some spatial studies to try and review that, and we'll continue to look for opportunities to improve our monitoring.
So you may move sites from 5 Ventry Street and Alexandra to somewhere else. Does that mean that your statistical analysis will need to start all over again?
if we move, we will have to start all over again. So there is definite benefits for not moving again.
In saying that, if it needs to be done, we can do it. And if we were to do that in a planned way, we could certainly do it more robustly than the last shift.
Finally, if I look again at Alexandra 5 Ventry Street, those single digit numbers mean that on those particular days a year, the national environmental standards for air quality were exceeded, yeah?
Correct.
3 last year.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions regarding the report, the content of the report, which is basically setting the background information that's there? Andrew?
Sarah, I just recall in your report there was a mention about Clutha that historically we had some data up to, I don't know, a few years ago, 18 or 2018 or whatever. And you want to just give any background why we've haven't continued on with that monitoring or that as a monitoring site? you.
So that decision was made before I was in this role, but from what I gather, I think the instrument just broke. So all of our instruments, they're going on 20 years old now, and that instrument just, for whatever reason, wasn't replaced then. However, we're including Balclutha in our sort of ongoing analyses that we're currently doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you very much, Sarah, for sticking with us this morning. There's also been a lot of work put in, and at the end of the day, what you've presented to us is a good background report of where the science is at and where things are at, and it's from there we can start basing some decisions going forward. Thank you very much. And we can move on to the next report. Oh, sorry. Sorry, we need to. Oh, okay. All right. Oh, sorry, we need to note the report. I've got Kate to move it, and we need a seconder. Alexa, thank you. Any debate? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Sorry about that. Turn my machine back on. So we'll move on to 9.2. Water quality biomonitoring report from 2018 to 2023, which is the most recent state environment monitoring undertaken to inform the attribute tables of the national policy statement for freshwater management. This report was prepared by Marcus Ding. I think it's spelled that. Marcus is overseas at the minute, so I see we've got Jason sitting in, and I can see in my far left peripheral, I can see Rachel Ozane, who's also knows a bit about water quality testing, so I'm sure she'll have needed. We could call on Rachel. Once again, this report's for noting, and we'll just before we start, I would just like to say that the report is in a slightly different format, perhaps from what we've been used to with some of the stuff, and has been sort of upskilled and probably, if anybody's got questions around the layout or feedback, that would be really awesome as well. I found it pretty good, but there's some of the stuff, just how we work, how we circles, might need a little bit of explaining on the way through. But I just like to say, with like having that, I suppose I'm a pictorial man, but having that having the visual set out makes it a whole lot more easy to read. So that's my comment. So I'll just pass it over to, I'm not too sure who, Jason, I guess, or Anita initially, is it?
Yeah, just firstly, so Jason will answer some questions, and we had some questions circulated, which he's happy to answer. I just want to acknowledge there were some typos in the attachment. We apologise for that. This report has taken quite some time. There's a few versions, and we just can't seem to get on top of this one. I called it cursed and it's not really, but it has challenged us. So I just want to acknowledge that. And before it goes out, it will be checked and triple checked, maybe by some fresh eyes that aren't ours, because we've seen it a few times, just to make sure that they're all corrected.
Right, I'll just give a bit of background on where this report fits to start. So in our reporting cycle, you've got annual reports like this, which compare against the NOF tables in the NPSFM, which are required. And then you've got more comprehensive 5-yearly reports on state and trends, which you might recall I was up here about this time last year acting as Rachel, presenting on state and trends. State and trend reports provide trends, which are how you assess whether something is improving or degrading, whereas these reports just provide state and how they compare to the national tables. There's always a want to compare state over years. So, you know, a site got a B this year and it had a A last year, therefore it's gotten worse. There's pretty limited value in doing so, to be honest. And the reason for that is these only go over 5 years, and things like climate cycles go over decades. So you can lose a dry year and pick up a wet year, or vice versa, which can cause sites to effectively change grade, but not actually be getting worse due to land use or anything like that. So when we have those 5-year state and trend reports, we often talk about 10-year trends and 20-year trends. And we talk about 10-year trends being hard to filter out the signal from land use versus natural processes. Even harder on a 5-year scale, you can't do it. So there's pretty limited benefit in comparing those things. So this is just state as it compares to the national framework, and it's not really useful for assessing change. Through our monitoring review, we are looking at ways that we can better reflect change over short-term cycles. So instead of having to wait, say, 10 or 20 years to pick up a trend, we're looking at monitoring strategies that would enable us to inform that much quicker. So that'll be something you might see something on in the future, but not in this report at this point in time. This is just a legislative thing for the NPS. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jason. We have questions on the paper. We have Elliot, Ryan, after Elliot.
And sorry for not throwing a heads up about those questions. Are totally all good if you don't have the on top of this at the top of your head. But just thinking about any of the modelling that was used for this reporting and the recent report that came out from the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment around modelling used around different regional councils for various water things. Just wondering if there might be any staff thoughts about what it talked about with regards to modelling ORC users, for example, particularly with regards to this report.
Yes, this report won't have a whole lot of stuff that the PC would have addressed. So this report relies on distributional statistics like means and 95th percentiles and stuff in the NPS, which are calculated in a reasonably standard way across the country. The PCE report evaluated the tools that we might use and was somewhat useful in the way that it's done it, but modelling is also a big process type thing. And so often if you get your process right, you'll select the right tool. And so we're going to work on the process that we go through modelling and trying to make sure that we end up with the right tool through that process.
Thank you. We have Brian and then Michael.
Cool. I'm wearing my governance hat and I'm just trying to determine whether we should be concerned, whether we're pulling the right levers and so forth. And you've talked about the limitations of assessing trends and so forth. But nevertheless, just looking at the phosphorus, E. coli and suspended sediment for the rivers, maybe E. coli for a start. It says E. coli is above the D band, which is the bottom line, national bottom, for at least one parameter, approximately half the monitored river sites. So does that mean that half are below the national bottom line, or what percentages that is below the national bottom line?
I don't have the percentages to hand. So the E. coli table won't actually have a national bottom line. So in the NPS, those are stipulated as the national bottom line, and the E. coli one doesn't have one. It just goes down to the D and E band. If it says that approximately half the sites are in the D and E band, that would mean the other half are above that
half of them are below it.
Okay, so we should be concerned about half the sites, yeah?
Yeah, coli is always a tricky one. The reason for that is it relies on a 95th percentile, which means if you've got 5 high samples in a 5-year period, you will fall on the D band. So when you fail based on that 95th percentile, I would worry much less than when you fail based on the median. That said, if you were to look at the state and trends report, you'll see that a lot of sites do have degrading trends for E. coli. Some of that will be natural sources and some of that will not. We obviously control the anthropocentric sources, so it's important that we try and reduce those as much as possible.
Cool, thank you. I mean, looking at your pictorial, there's a lot of red dots there, yeah?
Yeah, and there will be, and you'll see that some of them are due to the 95th percentile, which is that bottom right-hand quadrant of the circle, and other ones are failing across the board. So where you're failing across the board, that's a much worse indication of E. coli, as you're missing the median, which means you're failing it quite often. Whereas if it's the 95th percentile, you're talking about high flow events, most likely.
Yeah.
And that's probably less of a concern. People don't tend to be swimming at that point in time. So it's not to say that you shouldn't seek to manage E. coli in those times, you should. But those ones where you've got a full circle of red are much more of a concern.
Okay, and in terms of phosphorus, 15 of the 106 sites were below the national bottom line, yeah, and there are issues in Dunedin Coast, the Manuherikia, and North Otago, yeah?
Yeah, so again, phosphorus is another table that doesn't have a national bottom line.
Okay, I'm not going to well here.
That's what keep pointing.
But you're quite right. North Otago has some D-band and the Pomahaka has some D-bands. The phosphorus table is particularly aimed at invertebrates.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty weak link to phosphorus. It's more closely linked to sediment. So you'd probably be more worried about sediment in those locations. That said, you do have high values in North Otago for phosphorus.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, what should we, so what? What as a governor should I be taking from this report so that I'm doing my job for the environment?
So what I would say is this report is that annual piece where we compare against the national framework.
Yes.
So what this does is it gives you how we compare sort of nationally. That state and trends report from last year is what gives you the change. And you'll see that there are a number of degrading trends in different parts of the region. And degrading trends obviously mean that you need to improve. And then anywhere through the land and water plan that we haven't found that we're meeting our target attribute state, you will also need to improve. So those two documents, one scientific and one a planning document, will direct where you need to act most.
So Mr. Chair, we've got work to do. And we have issues of poor water quality to address.
We're not asking you to make decisions based on
No,
this annual
I
report. This
realise
is
that,
literally a
but-
point in time, and as Jason said, it's the state and trend report last year. That's the one that directs you more.
Thank you.
This report is required. We are required to deliver this report. We do it in the most useful way possible, but it's framework is specified and we deliver to that framework.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we just need to remember this report is about snapshot in time. It's not about which way the elements are moving up or down or whatever. It's really about how this report is being put together and developed and presented. I've got Michael, Councillor Laws, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. I understand what you're saying about national standards, but those are the ones that are set by the government on water quality, yeah? So you're measuring, as I understand it, against those standards. Does that mean that if I look at two issues which have received a lot of public attention, particularly from environmentalists, when I look at nitrate toxicity and nitrate, and oxygen in rivers, and yes, rivers, so pages 63 and 64 of my report, that we're actually doing pretty well against those national standards?
Partially. So the nitrate table in the NPS is directed at toxicity, which is the threshold at which invertebrates begin to become impaired. Under clause 3.13 in the NPS, we also have to set nutrient targets for things that are affected by nutrients like periphyton biomass. inverts at a non-toxic level, so non-toxic level, if you will, plants, dissolved oxygen, and a whole slew of other things. So the one that's most closely linked there would be periphyton, which is your algae. And so some areas of the region, if you go back to some of the modeling that we've done for land, will require nitrate reductions to achieve those periphyton biomass targets. But we are doing quite well against that toxicity threshold, which is good.
Yeah, no, it's encouraging. And the second one is E. coli. It's down here under rivers. Yep, there's a lot of red on that particular map. Do we do any, and you just said to me, well, I think you've said to me that where there are those red dots, they won't necessarily be human waste that's causing the E. coli problem. Can we differentiate between bovine and avian when it comes to E. coli without testing it, or do we test it when we test those E. coli levels?
So we would need to test, and we can fecal source track, but the thing with fecal source tracking is it's generally, I would say, underwhelming. In any fecal source track sample, you will find bovine, avian, and other sources of E. coli. So you'll come back with a smattering of everything, which points to nothing, right? So it's kind of
Yeah. So it's not helpful, is it really? I mean, we know it's there, but we just don't know what causes it if we wanted to stop it.
The one exception would be when it does come back with human in it, in which case that would direct you towards septic tanks or something like that. Yeah.
Well, but that's the next question. I mean, it's a nice map, thanks very much. There's the red. Brian's question's pertinent. As a governor, you ask, okay, so what next? Does this mean we need to act as a council? So do we would need to know, would we, when we measure E. coli a little bit more for us to be able to come to some policy decisions around E. coli?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say that. So if you look at the state and trends report from last year, you'll see across both 10 and 20-year timeframes, E. coli is increasing. And that would correlate with land use change and those sorts of things. We know that we can mitigate a portion of the E. coli load. It's hard to say how much. So we do what we can to mitigate that portion.
But if we don't know what the E. coli is caused by, how can we make an assertion that it's caused by land use change?
I'll probably help with this. So yes, we do know that there's a mix of sources that cause E. coli to be measured in our waterways, and we know that we measure pretty substantial amounts of E. coli in many of our waterways, shown on the map. But we're at the same time we are doing plenty about it. So all of the work that's gone into the land and water plan has been informed by reports like this, or that are more fit for purpose for that kind of decision making. The land and water plan includes a range of actions, as is proposed at the current point, that would benefit many of the parameters that are measured with exceedances in this report. And so all of that work builds up to achieve outcomes and achieve reductions or improvement against natural bottom lines or whatever you want to measure against. So I think the short answer is that, yeah, we're doing a heap and probably the busiest this organisation has ever over a period of time, and that we're reviewing that land and water plan at the moment. It's not far away from moving forward.
Okay, and finally, this is a water quality report, which looks also at lake water quality as well. Is it because you are following national standards that you haven't measured aquatic pest infestations or like lagrosiphon, lake snow, Diremo, etc. in terms of this report?
Those would be covered in some of the SPI type categories, I believe, and in some of the phytoplankton community type stuff, but they aren't explicitly stated in those tables. So they won't be reported on in that way because of the national framework.
Right, but they do affect water quality, yeah?
Yep.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's awesome.
I've got a number of questions, all I hope relatively short, so I'm just split over the one. But look, thank you. The other councils that have to report on the same database, and will those be linked or sent through to us so that we can do that comparison at some stage? Are they going to be presenting in a similar way?
As in the national comparison?
Yes, yeah,
So they will report on it in their own way.
okay,
If you want to do that, Law is a good place, and that they will report all of these things as well.
great.
So yeah, Law is probably your first protocol if you want to do that.
Okay, I think you covered this off. The SOE report isn't going to change because of this. This is may inform, but yeah. I think it's really helpful to understand how this data is collected, because some of it is done all the time, I think, and some of it isn't. And things like sediment, I'm really interested in, because it presumably you have there's a whole lot of things that influence sediment. And so how often is that measured?
Yeah, so the majority of parameters in this report would be sample monthly, using a grab sample. So sediment, we go turbidity and convert that to clarity, which comes out of sediment. Because we use clarity to assess the quote suspended sediment parameter. But most things are sampled monthly. There are a few exceptions, which off the top of my head would be fish IBI, which is once annually. The reason for that is it costs quite a lot of money to go through the protocol to do that. Macroinvertebrate community index or macroinvertebrate indexes themselves are once annually. Dissolved oxygen in rivers is continuous. So that's a probe that measures every, I think, 15 minutes. And there will be a handful of other ones which are annually, but generally it's once monthly
Thank
for
you.
5 years.
Yeah, that's great. Look, and look, the sediment one, and congratulations on putting that narrative in there, because it is one that is of concern, but there's so much naturally occurring sediment. And so I'm really interested, if that's something you're doing as a grad sample, when are you doing that? Because that again will be affected by, even just if you did it in autumn by willow drop and a whole lot of stuff like that, willow leaf drop, and yeah.
Yeah, so the grab samples are dictated by NEMS, which is the National Environmental Monitoring Standards, but effectively you go out randomly once within the month, and if it's a high flow day, it's a high flow day. If it's a low flow day, it's a low flow day, and you get your sample. And over 5 years, you're trying to get a full variation of what would occur in that 5 year period.
Right.
Can I just?
Yeah.
Just quickly, so you say, how do you determine a high flow day as opposed to a flood day?
Oh, so I just mean if if you're going out Tuesday and it happened to be a flood day, you're still going out Tuesday even though it is flooding. We don't target those events. If your sampling day happens to fall on an event, you capture the event.
So that if there was a sample taken during an event, you'd expect to have elevated levels of pretty much everything massively. So particularly around the E. coli, you're pretty much shot for 5 years because you got a high reading.
If you picked up 5 of those in your 5 year window, which you may or may not. We don't tend to capture floods that often.
I think it's three results, isn't it? 5%.
Very hard to capture a flood in the last year, I think. It just feels like that.
Well, no,
Really.
I'm pretty sure there was one come through about the 20th of January or something like that.
Maybe in your area, but not us. Look, if I just, have we got any idea of where the NPS may go? Look, this is really helpful stuff, but I'm also interested in,
No, and even NFE officials at this stage don't have any indications either, so we have no indication at all.
Okay. So this is in the last question. If I look at Lovell's flat on the toxicity, and this is something that they'll be discussing tonight, you've got a green and yellow on site 40, which I think is Lovell's flat. They've done quite a lot of work in that community, and they're still ongoing doing a lot of good work in that area. Have I got that right, Lovell's flat? Anyway, just understanding how quickly will we be expecting to respond when we already know someone is responding and has responded because they're leaders and they're getting ahead of the ball game, because it's really hard to know the reaction. And
yeah, so generally our SOE sites aren't located in small bits of catchments like a first or second order stream. They're located further down, which means that they've probably got a 7 year plus lag before we measure whatever has happened on land. So what we're looking at in that monitoring review is how we can monitor in other locations and potentially more often to pick up those changes a bit faster, which would enable us to move into a space of forecasting when we might expect to see changes at our SOE sites and what sort of change we might expect to see.
And so we may not put in rules or implement changes because we know it's already coming as well, potentially. We can see that happening. Yeah, thank you.
I'll have councillor Kelleher, then Malcolm.
Thanks. The sediment one was really interesting to me because it's the one that the community certainly hone in on a lot because it's visual, you see it. I'm looking at, like, this is a snapshot in time, but then it is based on sampling that is done monthly. And then so we look at, let's say, the Menehira, and then we look at Clutha. And of course, the Clutha can change overnight from a rainfall and shot over, and the whole river is brown all the way. So, but the Menehira samples here are showing that really the whole river is in the red band for sediment. But I see that river every day. And so I don't really visualize it as something that you could say that is a fair representation of how you would see sediment for the Menehira. So can you explain to me why that with the Clutha, because there are stage, there's different colours along the stem, but yet we're showing really the entire of the Menehira is high in sediment.
Yeah, that's right. So a couple of things there. The first is sediment is a median statistic. So you're not really going to worry about those events because that'll fall on the far right-hand side of your distribution. And then you'll have low flow days falling on the far left-hand side. And we're worried about that middle bit with sediment monitoring. And then the other thing is sediment uses a class framework. So you've got what are like river types, if you will, where you've got glacial rivers or mountain rivers or hill and lowland that fall in different classes. And it specifies different clarity that you need to hit for each sort of class. There's a different framework for each form of river. So the Clutha will fall in a totally different framework than the Menehira in this case, as with the Dart and the other ones. So a lot of those differences will arise due to that, in that the Menehira would probably be naturally quite a clear river. So relative to how it performs within its river class, it would be quite low. Whereas if you were to look at some of the other rivers here, they perform quite highly within their river class.
Right. So I can have confidence that you've said the Menehira is naturally quite a clear river.
Yep.
The Central Otago Environmental Society will look at that and say, told you so. Look at that. Okay, I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Again, I think this is not the trend report. You need to go to the SOE state and trend report and have a look at what that says about sediment in the Menehira, because I don't know what it says, but that's the picture that tells the story for the solution we're looking for, rather than this one.
Thank you. I have councillor Malcolm, then Mifflin.
So just going back to E. coli or back to any of these parameters really, I'm just assuming in the way that it's measured and the way things are happening that we may never get any of these, especially in E. coli, we may never get them out of a red band. If I particularly look at Thompson's Creek, and that if you look at the trend from 2004 to 2017, which has come from a real high down to a pretty good level, and now we've got the exemplar catchment group working its way in that area as well, and we're establishing a wetland, and we've already seen birds from all over the show from the Waitaki River now decide to go over and nest in that wetland, which is absolutely awesome. So that's going to create it is going to magnify the avian E. coli position. So we may never ever get that out of a red band. And yet we'll probably be we will be castigated by people because it's in a red band. And in fact, naturally, we may never get it out of a red band.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. The NPS provides effectively exemptions for areas that would naturally not comply. So to quote, qualify for that exemption, we would have to be able to quantify that it would never comply even under natural settings, which we haven't had a work program to do to date. And so if we had put through measures that manage E. coli and these sorts of things in the portion of the load that we can, and we're able to quantify that it wouldn't actually comply, and the reason that work program didn't exist is the NPS didn't exist, then we would work on putting through an appropriate target that reflected that it wouldn't naturally comply. So a good example is the Dart will never naturally comply with its sediment target. And so we're quite happy to say, look, it's a naturally turbid river. It's always going to be a turbid river. It should be a turbid river. We're okay with that.
So where you get a natural occurrence, there will be a mechanism.
Yep.
So then we just still have that sitting in red on a graph.
So ideally.
You know what I mean? I'm just, like, we've got to be real that everyone's doing everything.
Yeah, so moving forward, if a new land and water plan were to come into effect, we would report against that land and water plan, where if you were hitting your target, then you would be great, so to speak. And
Yeah.
so if your target was the natural load and you were achieving the natural load, you'd be great.
Yeah. And I'll probably just, the other example probably around that is the Kakanui, which there clearly there's issues of E. coli there, which are both human and agriculture, but there's a huge the gull colony up there which is created, and we've just had an exceedance of swimmability in the estuary, which was avian. So that would be all taken into account. So I mean, I can't go and shoot all the gulls, but I can do the other work to tidy the other stuff up. So that's
yeah, that's right. We control the best aspect of that we can, and meanwhile we'll have to put through as the best program we can to try and sort out what's natural.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Newton.
This is an excellent report. Incredible data being gathered in all these areas. I guess a couple of questions that I do have to you is, were there any surprises, for one? And then the second question, you know, we've got E. coli, we've got sedimentation, we've got dissolved oxygen, DRP. Out of all of those, what is the worst for the health of a river? And then the next observation that I can make, I just guess, I just need some a confirmation. I mean, I see red E. coli around where there has been intensive dairy growth, dairy farming intensification. And for me, I think, okay, there's a big contributor to E. coli caused by that. Am I correct? So there's three things there.
All right, I'll work backwards. You don't have to remind me of the first one to go, be fair.
Just surprises.
Yeah. So you will notice that you've got lower scores in areas with dairy. There's a couple of things going on there. We know that on a per hectare basis, dairy can be quite intense, both in nitrate, phosphorus, E. coli, all sorts of contaminants. However, it does tend to comprise a relatively small portion of the catchment in terms of area. So if you go through the total load, a relatively small portion of the load will be derived from dairy. But if you go towards, per hectare, what's coming in, it would be higher. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It's more intense, but it doesn't comprise as much of the land area as, say, sheep and beef or other land uses. Second question was, sorry.
Just.
Oh, which one's the worst? That'll be sediment. So depositing fine sediment pretty quickly can mark things. First question.
Just that observation around the red dots and intensification around dairy farming. So.
Oh yeah, I've done that right. I think
Surprises.
Surprises. Thank you. Yeah. So there are a few, and I'll jump back to the state and trends report from last year. But if you look across all of those attributes, you'll find that phosphorus basically across New Zealand is improving, which is great. Part of that is because we've put through systems like spray instead of flood irrigation, which result in intensification, which leads to nitrogen degrading. So that's sort of an interesting pattern that you see. The other one is often invertebrate scores, even in natural areas, are degrading. Why is that? Hard to say. We aren't really sure, but that's another interesting trend from that state trend report.
So I guess, I mean, with all the efforts that's gone on over the last 10 or more years to manage nitrates, to manage runoff and water, are we seeing significant improvements in water quality?
Yeah, so I think if you look at some of the modelling for the land and water plan, you'll see that you can get somewhere between 10 and 20% change, depending on where you are in a catchment and what the land use is comprised of, which is a reasonable change. And some of the long-term sort of good management practice studies that are coming out of dairy and other industries are showing that if you implement good practice, you can get improving trends. So we are starting to see those practices flow through into trend results. So we know that things like mitigations do improve water quality to an extent. It's good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Noon.
Jason, just going back to suspended sediment and your commentary with the map talks about the presence of natural sediment, etc. And I think about Kyburn and also the head of the Manuherikia. I'll just use those two as an example because I'm sure there are others around where historically they have been gold mining areas, and every time you have a fresh or a flood or whatever, you get quite a bit of that movement of that material. So do you consider that material as a natural occurring, like a glacial player, or is it something that you consider as a man-made substance, for one of the better words?
Yes, that's a good question. Since sediment is a median, generally you won't pick up those sort of movements from that sort of stuff in your actual grade here. That would occur more on a flood flow type situation. So that's not such a big deal in terms of that sediment grade. The things that we tend to consider natural at the moment are the really clear examples like glacial flour or the tannin staining in the Tairi, where we would exempt those. We'll probably have to do a bit of work on sediment as an attribute moving forward. Long term, we either don't want to be converting from turbidity to clarity, or we want to be doing that with the site specific equation, because that can vary a bit. And we'll also have to do a bit on what's natural versus what isn't, which we haven't totally done yet. So we've sort of taken the far ends of that spectrum and said, yep, that's obvious. But those more nuanced views, we haven't yet figured out where we sit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, to go, and this is a question I put earlier through email under, and I know you don't want to get in comparisons, but inevitably do, because this will go to the paper and we will be asked for comparisons and how things are moving. And that you told me that's in the state of the environment and the trends, but we have on our website on the homepage the 2017 to 2022, but this one is not on there yet. So that would be good to have that. But then the section, the schedule 15, which is the limits and target on NH4, E. coli, turbidity, DRP from that last period, when will the one for this period go on?
So my understanding is as soon as we fix those quick typos in this report, this would go online, and that schedule 15 will accompany it. And then in terms of the overall picture, there was a paper that came through council a couple of months ago that had 3 sort of snappy bullet points of land and water plan summary, and that would probably be the most comprehensive view on water quality we've had as a council. So I direct to that.
Yeah. So as a matter of process, why couldn't we put those in at the same time? Because this is only a noting report. We're not moving that we're accepting your figures, because I'm not going to go out and test them on the way home. Or I could have a drink out of the shag or something on the way home. But so why don't we have that the schedule 15 and that at the same time, so the inevitable comparisons can be done?
Yeah, I can help with it. So in the past we have put schedule 15 and NOF compliance together. It becomes really confusing for a couple of reasons. The targets are different, and schedule 15 applies to only a percentile below median flow. And so you start getting these doesn't comply with the national, but does comply with schedule 15, doesn't comply with schedule 15, does comply with the national, and it just becomes a really mixed conversation. So this year we've split them to try and stop those conversations from conflicting and becoming mixed, to try and have a more clear conversation.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Very good way to show it, what you've done. Yeah.
We will send that to Marcus.
Well presented.
Oh, I was just going to move up.
Can I ask a question first?
No.
No, over time.
I'll say, I'll hold that just for a moment. I've got my question on still. No, just around with the E. coli one, I find the E. coli one relatively confusing because now there's 4 different measures. So when we're actually looking at the measure, okay. So we talked about schedule 16 because we're probably 15, sorry, because we're probably used to that. Which measure in here does that relate to? Is it the 540?
There is no direct corollary to Schedule 15. The reason for that would be, I believe that's a 80th percentile when below median flow. Rachel's shaking her head yes, which is good. Whereas the NPS has a median and 95th to 5% above 540 and 260. So there's no direct comparison in the NPS, sadly.
So, can you say that again just slowly, like so?
Yeah. So Schedule 15 has a different statistic that the NPS doesn't. Is the short answer.
So the NPS one, so you say it's a 95th
95th percentile across all flows.
across all flows. So that means 5 tests in 100 or
5 out of 60. Yep.
Yeah, whatever.
Then you're in trouble. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So they go and then you got your next number as the number.
Yep. That's pretty much, not quite, but yeah, more or less.
Just the other thing to add, Schedule 15 relates to the current water plan, which will obviously not be the current water plan anymore shortly. So Schedule 15 we won't be reporting on it in the way that we do at the moment. And we'll just be continuing with this type of stuff, plus the trends reports and potentially some new reporting, depending on what comes out of the land water plan process.
Yeah, so I guess I need to thank Rachel for teaching me all about Schedule 15, and now I'm going to have to re-educate myself, I guess. So, poor Marcus. No, that's really good. So we've got a mover in a second. I think it's any discussion. We got Gretchen and Kate, yeah, Gretchen.
Thank you. Excuse me. Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is a huge step up in terms of the way that this is presented. I think this is really excellent. It is what it is. This is the data presented as it is, snapshot, and I think it's presented in a format that everyone can understand. There's a whole lot of other ways that we present data as well. E. coli does sort of stand out here. We have the LAWA site as well and the contact rec monitoring, which people would use for the purpose of having a look to see if it's safe to go in water. This is for a different purpose, but it's serving that purpose really well. It is showing a snapshot of Otago there. Hey, it's not a really comprehensive report. It is what it is, but it shows the straight out black and white facts of where we are in Otago, and we've got some pretty colours across the region, and that's not necessarily brilliant to have all of those colours there. And yeah, particularly in E. coli, there's some D and E bands right across that circle there. And yeah, these are not just in rural streams, these are in urban streams as well. We know that, we can see that, our eyes are open to the fact that often in our lowland waterways, urban, rural, they're not flash in a lot of areas. And yep, that's basically what it's showing. Thanks. Oh, yeah. I guess I should say as well, it shows that we've got some really, really fantastic water quality in Otago as well. And that is important to say because black and white, it's there. We've got some awesome sites and we're really, really lucky in Otago to have them because there's a lot of regions that don't have them. And man, we're proud of them. And yeah, that's another issue about what we do about that, but we can see that too. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Any other discussions? I'd just like to probably reiterate what Gretchen said. I think this is actually information set in a way that we can actually people will be able to relate to, and I'd really like to see it split down to basically an FMU level so that makes it a big gap and makes it really quite visual, because at the end of the day, people's water quality is something that is really quite complicated, but visually red, orange, green is people can see it. And I think sometimes we get I think it's really awesome that this is what it is, this is what the numbers are now. And we have got trends, and sure, we got a lot of good trends happening, but we still have to understand that this is where it still is, and there's still quite a bit of red on the pages. But also, the way it's set out is really clear, because it shows you really quickly where your areas of emphasis probably need to go. Because the red does stick out, and there's some of the, like, you know, some areas that are not quite so high in the red, they're more, you know, more compliant. So I think it's I said at the beginning, I'll start again, I think well done to Marcus and the team for coming up with something that I think is going to be able to have value with inside and outside ORC as an institution. So thank you very much.
I wasn't going to say something, but I am going to react to that, because I think it is really important that where we see red, we don't necessarily see something that we can change or need to change. And that is exactly the trap that people will fall into. I think the presentation is fantastic. The fact is, we have to understand the systems in each site and understand that they are bad, and that there are some naturally occurring sediment issues. Arsenic isn't here, but I know that some areas will fail on arsenic because, and I thought it wasn't NPSF or FM measure actually, but I know that some areas will fail because that is a natural attribute in some areas. So I think it's really important that we take this as what it is, which is it's rare. Some sites only once a month. Some sites there are really difficult things to understand: dissolved oxygen and low flowing rivers. There isn't necessarily an easy answer, and we just have to take it as data. Please do not set the expectation to anyone that just because it's red, it's bad, or just because it's blue, that it's perfect. It may be that that's at the tipping point, and we need to make sure that that's staying at blue. So it won't necessarily give where we need to focus work on.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my concern too, because the moment we start speaking about it, and I do agree the report is really well presented, but you know, as we heard from the previous speakers, you focus on the negative first. But actually, the positive should be first, because when you look, there's an awful lot of blue and green and yellow there, and it's we've always said Otago has really good water quality, and then it has some issues in some certain sites. But for these, what's been presented here, and as explained to me, there's different types of red. You know, these are all the same reds, but actually the explanation as you hone in on, well, why is that all red? Well, actually, there's some difference around that red. But to out in the community, and that very genuine concern around water quality, they just see the red, and then they don't understand or don't then delve towards, well, what's the differences in those reds? And so I think it's very important that we focus on the absolute positive first, and then highlight that if there's issues to work in, we work and hone in on those issues and manage those. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, no, you know, I've heard what different councillors have had to say. Like, we're fortunate to take that we have some good water quality, but in a way, you know, that's more good luck than good management. That's our upper reaches of our rivers. As we go down into our lower reaches with intensive agriculture, we have issues, and that's where a lot of these red dots have come from, whether they're E. coli, phosphate, or suspended sediment. I acknowledge that there's been some improvements, but there's also been some degrading trends. And for me as a councillor, that's why it's vitally important that we get a robust land and water plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
If I look at bullet map indicator 39, 36 and 29, which are the Lindsays, the Leith and the Kaikoura, I just wonder how much daring is around those, and if it was not people doing that damage, which would be really interesting to have a real good look at, because it's a pretty terrible colour.
Yeah,
I do. Well, could you please let me finish talking? I did not interrupt you, so it would be really, really good. It would be really, really good if you could just stop interrupting, Chair. That would be quite good if you could make sure that happens.
You carry on with your thing, Brian. You just sit back and say his words. Yeah, go.
Could you make it? He just said, "I don't want to listen to this shit."
No,
so that's exactly your words. So I either that gets removed, or I'll deal with it.
Brian? I think you need to retract that.
I retract that.
Thank you. Kieran, please tell us what you want to have to say.
What I want to acknowledge in this report is that it's very important that we report this to the public and the way that these marks are. There are issues within Otago with water quality. There are so many people throughout the province that are working exceptionally hard to ensure that that water quality improves, and that water quality is a key to the way they are operating. It is not through good luck that that water quality is improving. It is through hard work, and they have had a planning system in Otago that has been inept for the last 20 years. And we're finally getting a planning system put together that will help everyone work towards the goal of honouring Te Mana o Te Wai and ensuring that we have good, sustainable water quality. So I would just hope that when this report goes out, that the reds are explained correctly, and also it is noted the very good work that people are doing throughout Otago to ensure that where there are problems, that things are fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malcolm. Any other discussion? If not, Councillor Mitchell.
A couple of months ago, I had the good fortune of being on Gillespie's Pass, and the water quality up there on those rivers was just, it was like champagne. It was beautiful, but there's no people up there. It's when we have people, we have farming practices, and you're right, Kevin, that some of the streams and rivers in the city areas are impacted as well. Need to acknowledge the work of catchment groups, the farm plans that are being done, and also some of the improvements that we're seeing already after 10 or 15 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. If not, the papers, just the noting, it's been moved by Councillor Robson, seconded by Councillor Wilson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Good discussions. It's 12:30. We'll break for lunch for 1:05. Okay, so we'll adjourn the meeting for 1:05 for lunch. Thank you.
Complete lots of them.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome back to the Environmental Science and Policy Committee. We have Michael, you're online, all good, and we just note that Councillor Meffin has left as he said he would at 12:30. Now, just before we go any further, Councillor Wolf would just like to make a comment on the last paper.
Well, it's not just on the last paper, and that's why I didn't do it in the last paper. I just wanted to ask the question probably of the staff or the CE. But over the last few years, we've talked about data and making sure that it's available to the community. And I just wanted to reflect on the last data report we got, which was exceedingly accessible for anyone. It wasn't something that was technically hard to read. It made it much easier for us to digest the report as well as our community. And I just wanted to ask, is this part of our ongoing investment in making sure data is available and how that looks? Because I think it's really, really important, and understand how that works with which staff are doing that or how we fund that through whether it's comms or whatever. It's a wonderful example of improvement.
Yes, was the short answer. I think every time we hear feedback or we know looking at our reports, we know that effort was required to try and make them more accessible. We've started doing that, and it's a bit of a trial and error process. Every time we put a report out, we see feedback, look to make changes to enhance it. We try and make sure that the reports are always targeted for a purpose, and that we therefore make sure that the way they're communicated and the way the information tracked around them is fit for that purpose, but as accessible as possible to as big an audience as possible. But yeah, and the short answer is we've been putting a bit of effort into that type of stuff. This is I think it'd be Mark 2 or 3. And every time we receive feedback, we try and make it a little bit better again. We have put some money into it, but mostly time and effort from staff, just to try and make sure we're communicating in a way that resonates with others.
Well, thank you. I just wanted, we've been required a lot more money from ratepayers, and this is something that's really adding value to them, and I really want to congratulate you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll maybe speak a little bit more to that. So the science communication piece came up along a number of years ago, and we do recognise it's a specific skill, and there has been some funding found within the science budget to engage some specific resource from Otago Museum to support with this, given that's something that they do for a living, and they've supported the team and also had our communications and marketing team across it in terms of making sure it's consistent with our brand. So I'd also just give just reflect on the efforts that the science team have gone to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve and the value we can provide more broadly. Obviously, they prepare this information for a specific purpose, and they write some brilliant reports. And the challenge that we put, or I put to Tom and Anita and the team, was how do we provide more value by making it more accessible? And I think they've done an outstanding job, and I know the team have been really keen to take that challenge head on, and are now delivering some excellent stuff that you're seeing in reports and obviously in the handouts that I think Scott is going to talk to coming up. So not there yet, but very much something that we'll continue to focus on as part of the work we do. Because we do, you're right, we invest a lot of money in this. So how do we add the most value by making it accessible for as many people as we can?
Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's all awesome. We just it's just after lunch, so we're heading to the Scott House. So just before we go, I think basically the next paper 9.3 on page 90 is the development of the regional threat classifications and the regional cultivation status of indigenous vascular plants and amphibians. It's a report for noting, and I might, just before we start, I just once again, Scott's presented more than once to council and just recognise Scott's role in the development of the regional threat classification, which is becoming a nationally recognised standard, and his role in that. So that's awesome, Scott, and I know you're slowly but surely moving through our threatened and indigenous species for us, and today we're on grasses and frogs. So we'll pass it over to yourself.
Thanks for that, Lloyd. So this is the proceeding reports 3 and 4 on the regional conservation statuses. Previously, I've reported on the reptiles and the bats. So just to remind yourselves, threat classifications play an important role in monitoring biodiversity and informing conservation actions. In New Zealand, the Department of Conservation Te Papa-Arawhai is tasked with managing Indigenous species nationally under the Wildlife Act, but regional and district councils do have a statutory obligation to maintain Indigenous biodiversity under the Resource Management Act, and this includes to manage the habitats of threatened species. The New Zealand threat classification system is used to assess species nationally and is administered by the Department of Conservation on behalf of all New Zealanders. For regional councils, having a good understanding of regional population sizes and knowledge of where declines are occurring is key to managing the habitats of threatened species and supporting their recovery. This knowledge is particularly important for informing assessments of environmental effects conducted through the Resource Management Act consenting processes. The information can also feed into the prioritisation of conservation activities undertaken by regional and district councils, such as monitoring, pest, animal and plant control and restoration programs. While the New Zealand threat classification system is effective at the national level, it can overlook situations where species are under greater pressure locally. This information is essential to inform conservation action at small scales, such as within regions or districts. To address these needs, regional and unitary councils have developed a regional threat classification statuses, and this is what Lloyd alluded to, and I am a co-author on a standardised methodology for regional conservation assessment, and that's now gone out to peer review as of today, and the intent is that it's going to be published as part of the New Zealand threat classification system publication series. So far, 3 councils have been involved in these conservation statuses: Auckland Council, Greater Wellington Council, and our South Otago Regional Council. So this regional conservation status, it does leverage off the national assessments in the New Zealand threat classification system, and it's providing information relevant for the regional council. So the whole intent of it is not to undermine the national assessments. It's a complementary tool and just provides that regional or local specific information. So as mentioned, Otago has completed 4 regional threat assessments, and we have plans for more. Today, I'm going to talk about the 2 latest assessments and the reports for Otago. As Lloyd said, one is around the Indigenous vascular plants, while the other one is on amphibians. So the big one, for the Indigenous vascular plants, a total of 1,242 species were identified that are listed in the New Zealand threat classification system, and they're naturally occurring in Otago. And this large flora confirms Otago as one of the most botanically diverse regions in Aotearoa, New Zealand, containing a high proportion of the national flora. So until we start to do these types of assessments and the foundation for them in the species list, we just find it very hard to compare ourselves to other regions. And this highlights that we've got one of the most diverse regions from the ones that have already compiled that information. Actually, we are the most diverse from the ones that have compiled it. We're likely not to be the most diverse once other regional councils have done it. So, although there is a reasonable understanding of the national threatened and nationally at-risk plant taxa in Otago, the status of the populations of many native plants in Otago was poorly known. So we know the threat status, we kind of knew what was here, we just didn't know what was happening on the ground here. So this regional assessment attempts to remedy that situation. So through this process, we identified 227 taxa that are regionally threatened. So those are in the regionally critical, regionally endangered, and regionally vulnerable status. There's 270 that are regionally at risk. So that's regionally at risk declining and regionally naturally uncommon. 614 that are regionally not threatened, one that's a regionally non-resident native, so that's a colonizer arrived on its own steam since 1950, and 115 that are regionally data deficient. And that's where this expert panel didn't have enough information to be able to assign a threat status, and preferably you want to assign one. Cumulatively, this room of experts, they would have had about 150 years of knowledge amongst them. We were very fortunate to get this panel in the room. And where they didn't have the knowledge, we did go out to external services through PEX Communication. So I'm quite confident that this is actually, this will probably be the best regional threat assessment that's been completed so far. And I've had that acknowledged by Auckland Council and Greater Wellington Council when they distributed that to them today, because we also provided additional information than what they had around the type localities and the way that we're distributing that in shareable spreadsheets makes it much more accessible for other people to use as well. So in comparison, I also mentioned that we do have 10 taxa that have been regionally extinct. In the site we call it extirpated because they've been locally no longer there. One of them is nationally extinct, and the other 9 are just no longer in our region. And we did have 14 additional taxa that our experts identified that had not been assessed nationally. And that's because when you have such a big group like this, keeping up with the taxonomic changes, the splitting, the lumping of species or taxonomic units can be quite challenging. When we compare this to the national assessments through the New Zealand Threat Classification System, Otago would have 103 nationally threatened species, whereas we think there's 227, so a lot more threatened to Otago than they would be over all of Aotearoa. 218 that were nationally at risk, when we compare that to 275 that are regionally at risk. And then 30 that were data deficient nationally, and we came up with 115. And that's just illustrating that we don't have enough people on the ground actually looking for some of these taxa. So it's very hard to make an assessment because there's insufficient information out there. Our assessment also identified at least 36 species that are regional endemic, and that's meaning that they are only found in Otago. And of these endemic taxa, 28 have heightened risk of extinction, and that's looking at the nationally threatened or at-risk category. And that's at least, we only focused on some of the data deficient, the threatened and the at-risk categories to come up with endemics. There might be some at the not threatened level, and there could also be some at those other categories as well. A total of 321 taxa were identified as having national strongholds in Otago, and that's where 20% of the population are found in a region. So that's almost just over a quarter of our species are strongholds here, and that's just has to do with the diversity of our ecosystems and where the species inhabit those are within them. And that is 178 of those have heightened risk of extinction nationally. We also applied other qualifiers in the process, such as whether they were data poor, how much information we had to do the assessment, some biological qualifiers like range restricted, so whether they inhabit certain ecosystems or habitats, or whether they're biologically sparse, or how they are distributed across the landscape. And we also did population state qualifiers like one location, climate impact and extreme fluctuations. All this work will likely feed into other work programs. For instance, with the climate change strategy, I think they're looking around the impacts of climate change on Indigenous biodiversity. And first, we need to know what species we have in the region to be able to do some sort of assessments. And then we can do a preliminary look at it, and before we do more complex investigations on what types of threats climate change may pose to these indigenous species. Moving on from the indigenous vascular plants, I did do one for the amphibians, and we included that more for comprehensiveness. This task was much simpler than the indigenous vascular plants. We only had the 3 taxa. 2 of those amphibian taxa were assessed as regionally introduced and naturalised, the brown tree frog and the southern tree frog. They're the ones that you hear croaking. Our native frogs don't really make much vocal noise, and they're not found on the, no longer found on the South Island mainland. And we did find a regionally extinct frog, the Markham frog, and that was only discovered in 2018 at Mount Nicholas Station in a subfossil record, and it's dated about 1400 years ago, but presumably it would have been over much more of the region. Any questions?
That's awesome. Might just add, just on the second page of the actual report part, there's a picture there of a couple of mushrooms. They're not mushrooms apparently, they're actually vascular plants. Scott assures me that they fit the bill, so there you have it.
Yeah, funny about that one. This species is only known from one location. It's Craspedia argentina. There's 19 to 27 individuals in the wild. We don't really know if it's 19 or 27 because they have a dormant stage. And they're in a really cool, critically endangered ecosystem, the inland outwash gravel. So when you head up towards Lake Dunstan, along the road, you'll see a sign to Mahikikatia Scientific Reserve. You pop in there, you probably won't see it, but that's the general location that you'll have to look to find it. And that sort of location also has some other rare and threatened ecosystems because of the unique processes that determine why those ecosystems are actually there.
That's awesome. Thank you, Scott. Please, if you're looking up there, don't stand on them.
Make them into an omelette.
I've got Kate and Lauren.
Detailed question, but Matagari, I've talked to Mike Wilson about Matagari and he's saying, I thought it was nationally threatened. And it's interesting that you've given a different listing here as in declining. And so I'm just wondering how this goes against national standards or whatever they are, or does this replace what that?
Yeah, Mike was actually on the
Yes,
expert panel. You're testing me because there's 1,242 species to remember, and I'm more of an expert on reptiles, so
Okay, so
I'll know that comprehensively. But in terms of Matagari, that's at risk declining, so it's got the same threat status. We're not trying to undermine the national process as mentioned.
Okay.
So my understanding is that it's at risk declining.
Oh, it's the same in the national standards.
Correct.
I must have misunderstood what he said. Thank you. No, that's
Yeah.
great. It's incredible data.
I'll be able to check that later. That shareable spreadsheet that is accessible through the web page now. It makes filtering this a lot more easily than going through the 138 pages of the report. But part of the process that we're working through with formalizing that methodology is that we can't go under for the threatened species. So that's in the NZTCS since 2021. That's nationally critical, nationally endangered, nationally vulnerable, and now nationally increasing. So we can't go under that. For the at-risk category, which is currently at-risk declining, declining, naturally uncommon, relict, and recovering, you can move within that category or you can go up into the threatened.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Hopefully that clarifies.
Just one other question is, how important is iNaturalist for people understanding? I mean, are you finding new things through people reporting on iNaturalist as a citizen science app that people, or is that not something?
Yeah, no. So when we went around compiling this list of species, we would have gone to a number of online repositories, including the Community Science repository of iNaturalist. And it's just a complementary tool. For instance, compared to the New Zealand Plant Conservation Network, they have a series of species lists that we also downloaded, and using a programming language, the same one that Jason is very adept at doing. I just screened through that and put it in a list. We also went to the Flora series, so the hard copy, and did that. And then what we did is went through each of these lists and each of these taxa, basically species, and worked out whether the expert panel thought that they were occurring naturally in Otago. So we started off with about maybe 50 different repositories and sources, and whittled it down to one to make it more accessible. But iNaturalist, when we're getting to the research grade, it can be useful. You might also get a report from me in October on the fungi, and it was using iNaturalist was an upload of our only naturally critical fungi, and that's found in Otago, and that was done through a community scientist. That's also subsequently been found and posted on iNaturalist down on Rakiura Stewart Island. Yes, a useful tool.
Awesome. We have Brian.
Cole. Just as a general question, why do we have 227 threatened species and 275 at regionally at risk species? Why? I know that but why? And if you're able, what are some simple things that we can do to address it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why we have that number of species is that we do have a diversity of habitats and ecosystems.
It's more about the threat. Why are they threatened and at risk?
Yeah, and I'll be getting to that. And we've got that diversity because we have that number of ecosystems and habitats, and often they're quite rare habitats. They were unnaturally uncommon. And they're often in locations that were quite desirable for humans. So they're threatened by a lot of anthropogenic human processes. So that will be development. So for instance, along the coast, when we settle, we normally try to stabilize things to benefit humans. So that puts as a threat that land use change to some of our rare and threatened plants, just as an example. So it's that diversity of habitats and the land, and the drivers of decline will be things like land use change, invasive alien species. For the plants, it's often the weeds, the grasses that are smothering. It could be the browsers, with our emphasis on predator-free 2050 as a nation. We're diverting our resources away from controlling ungulates, which can be targeting some of these more palliative species. So it's a suite of reasons why we have these threatened and rare species.
And some simple things that we can do to address it.
So to address the decline, the drivers of decline, I would be trying to identify what they are and putting in mechanisms in place to halt or reverse that decline. So for instance, if it's the browsers, ungulates or possums, if you were serious about it, you'll probably do some sort of control of them in certain locations.
And are we doing that? Sorry, Mr. Chair. Last question. Are we doing that? What degree are we doing that?
In some places we're doing a good job, and others we're not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The usefulness of doing this information is we can actually start to understand where and why we might target and what we might do, whereas we didn't have this information before. So it does, as Scott has said, it will inform the decisions we make going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. So this is the evidence base to inform it. It's up to yourself to provide that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Andrew and then William.
Thanks, Scott. So I imagine that there was a ground truthing process involved with this development of this is obviously the third and fourth report that's come through. So it's been a ground truthing process as well?
Not with all the data, but as an expert panel, cumulatively would have over 150 years of experience, would also go out to the relevant other people to check on certain taxa. But it's very similar to how the national assessment goes, where we're relying on the expert opinion to inform it. But again, this is the starting point. If you want to direct us to do more of that ground truthing or do more of the management, that would have to take additional work.
Well, I asked that question. We'll go back to it in a moment. But the other thing is that 70% of New Zealand land is owned privately. So obviously, a lot of what's been identified is on private land. Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. And I was wondering whether QE2 covenanted land, which I think is a couple 100,000 hectares in total in New Zealand. Let's say 10% of Otago is 10% of the land mass, about 20,000 hectares of that area. I imagine that all that information would have been available. Those experts would have had access to all that information because those habitats would be important also to identify through this process and the species that exist in those habitats. So I assume that's all been taken into account.
Correct. We used all available information that we had access to it. In terms of QE2, that's an interesting one in Otago. We actually do have quite a bit in QE2 land as confidence, but it's mainly in one station. We actually have very little actually QE2 confidence compared to the rest of the country, depending on the size of our region. But because of your decision a couple of years to start funding again the QE2, we've got better relationships with them and we're assisting them more now. And even just this year, we're going to be starting to investigate with QE2 around the management of one species that will be like an analog for others because it's getting threatened, getting suppressed by grasses. That's at least the working theory, and we're going to go out and test that. So we are supporting QE2.
Brilliant, thank you. The last question, thank you, and it relates to my first question. So thinking about the ability to use the RMA process and have conditions of consent when private individuals want to develop a piece of land that happens to have something pretty special from an ecological perspective. So it's probably a question for Anita. So ultimately, do we end up with a schedule that becomes part of the land and water plan? So because what I'm thinking is when you get into a legal process, this sort of data, if it's attached to a RMA document, it's going to carry much more weight rather than it being introduced by an applicant, for example. So is that the ultimate outcome we are trying to achieve here?
Potentially. So we do have some threatened species mapping that's going into the land water plan through the work that's guided through the MPS freshwater. But we would want to think about how we'd use this information going forward, and putting it into a regulatory plan does change the way that we can use it. But that's a decision we haven't made in terms of these data sets yet.
Okay. Because I think the important thing is that often private landowners don't actually know what they've got until it's been identified and whatever. So I'm not suggesting developers and landowners wouldn't take on board a consent that said you will enhance a certain area of your property because it's got X, Y, and Z in terms of a species. It's a high valued ecological area. So I think it's really important that we have the ability to have that information to be able to prove that these areas are of high value and need protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Go ahead.
Just going to the amphibian report, so obviously there's no indigenous species still existing in the South Island. I'm just wondering if the report writers have any thoughts about the ecological role of those introduced naturalized taxa in our Otago ecosystems.
So in terms of the introduced and naturalized, whether they're ecological replacements for the extinct marken frog?
Yeah, and if they're having any positive or negative impacts on the indigenous biodiversity.
Well, firstly, I'm not sure if they're that much of an ecological replacement, like for filling the same ecological niche. The marken frog appeared to be more terrestrial, whereas, as you know, with their introduced and naturalized, they rely a lot more on water. It's very hard to make that inference though, based on the fossil records. In terms of their role in the ecosystems currently, I'm not actually sure how much information has been published on it. There will be some positive impacts. They can be used as a food source for some, but they'll also be having a negative because they will prey and compete with other species. So there are cases of the brown tree, no, not the brown tree frog, the southern frog, I think, preying on lizard. So yeah. So it's just not enough information. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question.
Thank you, Elliot. Do you have any other questions? Jared?
Thanks. The level of endangerment is really ring fenced to what we know, isn't it? So that we have a list of species, and then we're looking at means of how you might aim to protect that. And it has varying degrees of threatenedness. But in a way, some of the most threatened could actually become extinct, and then within a year, we've actually found another habitat. And it's only because we know what we know, and then we don't know what we don't know, because we haven't been able to canvass the entire country to identify every species, every habitat. So we could, from a resources perspective, put an awful lot of effort and time into something that is, because all we know is that this is all we have. We believe this is all we have, but actually if it did become extinct, it could appear again, purely because
we found it somewhere else.
It's been found somewhere else.
That's possible, yes. We are using the best available information, and we've canvassed, like if you look at the Indigenous vascular plant acknowledgement list, I've probably contacted, in addition to our 5 expert panel with that cumulative 150 years knowledge, probably 20 to 30 other people. So it's been quite a comprehensive exercise. But yes, that is a possibility. One thing that should be highlighted is that with the data deficient species where there is insufficient information, when you look at that nationally and globally, often those are more are in the threatened categories. So we're actually on a more conservative estimate of the number of species that have heightened risk of extinction in this report. So presumably, if we were doing more searching, particularly looking into those data deficient species, we're going to have a lot more threatened species in Otago than what this report is currently documenting.
Yeah, right, thank you.
Gary? Any other questions? Really like to move to note the paper. Did you get?
No, I said I was seconding you.
Oh, second. Kate, second it. Other questions, any other comments before we put the motion? Thanks.
Do you want to really?
I can speak
You go first, yep.
just to cover what we'll cover, because this is a mammoth piece of work we've got here and two very different sized pieces of work, but two big pieces of work in a series that we've been getting recently, which has been very cool to see and will give us that much bigger and clearer picture of the state of biodiversity around the region, which will help inform our actions to come. And so I just want to give a thanks to the staff and all the other academics and stuff that have been involved in this, and including at a national level, the regional classifications that have been ongoing and been a really good example of collaborating with other regions as well, which has been really cool to see. I think the amphibians would be, do need to sort of have a look and see what their roles are in our native ecosystems and do more research on that. I'll just give a brief anecdote from Phil Bishop, who was one of the very esteemed amphibian researchers who passed away a couple of years ago. But he one very cold morning in Naseby found one of the, I believe it was the southern bell frog, but it might be the other species, frozen solid in a lake in Naseby. Pulled it out, and it actually was still alive and hopped away once it had defrosted. So they're pretty cool species we've got here, and we need to take care of them. So,
do you want to speak to that?
Yeah.
It is the other species, and that's the only species in the southern hemisphere that can survive. Vertebrate species that can survive freezing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff. And then the comms work that we're doing around this as well is also super cool, and I'm hoping we can see the stuff in enviro school programs and stuff like that going on. So that's super cool to see.
Thank you, Elliot. It'd be certainly interesting having a cup of coffee with yourself and Scott. Gretchen?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing about how much we enjoy receiving these reports and how much of a buzz they actually, they genuinely give people, because it's important to our identity, our native plants and animals, and we care about them a whole heap, and they get us excited. And I guess, as part of our identity and outstanding Otago, we do care about that cloak of our unique plants as well. And here, actually, you've provided us some really interesting information. It's really powerful, and knowledge is power. There's some really cool stuff. You've said we've got 36 endemic species that we know about in the vascular plants, which means they live only in Otago. 35 of the vascular plants are found in only one place in Otago. So they're actually, they need to be looked after really well to keep them here in this region. And the percentage of Indigenous vascular plant taxa that's regionally threatened being 18.2 and regionally at risk 22.3. That's actually getting up near half that we're really pretty worried about. And we don't want to be that regional council that doesn't know what it's got till it's gone, because I think that's the risk, rather than the risk of looking around behind a tour and, hey, presto, here's another massive population we didn't know about. It's more likely the other way around of, hey, we turn our back for a minute and one of these is gone. That's more likely, and that's really not good. So it's fantastic to have all of this suite of information. And Scott, you're a massive asset, not just to this council, but actually to our whole region, for us to have this information. And you're working hard in the national space as well, adding real value. That's pretty awesome. This is work that we didn't used to be able to do in our council, and actually, even as a region, this is a first. So, pretty proud to be receiving all these. Well done. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'd just like to support everything that Gretchen's just said. That's awesome, and I think it's all part of telling our story. And sometimes the wee meetings like this can be life changing. I know now that I'll probably look twice if it looks like a mushroom and smells like a mushroom. It may be a plant, so I won't kick it. So we'll
smoke it.
So no other comments. We'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against. Carry. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. Thank you. So Scott's being replaced by who was next?
Not here.
Oh, Landon Soil. So we got Ben back
And
in
Mark.
Oh, Mark. Awesome. Okie dokie, so this is item 9.4 on page 257, land and soil monitoring. And this one was written by Eric Button, who's away on holiday, but not with Marcus. So we got so Ben stepping in and brought Mark along with him as well to fill in any gaps and present the paper for us. So it's just pretty much an update on the land and soil program. And I think this is another new program that's been getting established, and it's there's when you read into it, I like to have the dirt under my feet. I'm a bit of a soil man as well, so there's some really interesting stuff in this report. So it's also a report for noting, but we'll just let Ben, yourself, and Mark to take it away and step us through it. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Since our last meeting last year in Balclutha, Mark Crawford's joined our land and soil staff. He's very experienced in nutrient management and farm systems, so he's been a real asset. The paper today was largely written by Eric, who's overseas and missing the meeting today, unfortunately. But essentially, it's an update on our land and soil work that we've been up to. There's three primary parts: an update on three of our key map data sets, land use, irrigation mapping, and soil mapping through the SMAP program. There's an update to our soil health monitoring, which has been evolving over the past 3 years. And of interest this year, we also introduced a biological component, looking at the biology in the soils. And finally, the other aspect is just pointing to some new soil information resources that we've recently put up on the web. These include fact sheets about some of the common soils in Otago and management considerations and things. And Eric's put a lot of work into developing those, and they should be a real asset. So, so that's pretty much what the paper says, and happy to take any queries.
Thank you. Any questions, Brian?
Yeah, cool. Hey, thank you for this. I've just been spending a little bit of time on the irrigation table, and I think what it says is in the last 2 years, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been an increase of 7,064 hectares of irrigated land, and you've identified, I don't know, 10 or whatever irrigation types. Just a little bit of explanation about, the pros and cons. Obviously, pivots in terms of hectareage leading, followed by K-line, I think. But yeah, just maybe just some comments about in terms of where the ORC sits. The ORC looks at things like efficiency. It'll also look at things like runoff and all these types of things. Are we happy with what's actually happening on the ground in terms of the irrigation? And no doubt Gary will have some comments as well.
Quickly explain the backstory for that layer. It was originally developed by MFE in about 2017 at a national scale. That we found that it wasn't accurate enough for our needs going through the land and water plan. So we subsequently updated just the Otago area in 2021 and again in 2023. So it's an effort of continual improvement to try and get it capturing what is on the ground.
Cool.
In terms of the pros and cons, there's certainly a shift towards pivot, which is more efficient. Mark might be able to talk to, if you have any commentary about.
Other than that, there's a degree of error because they're a desktop type study, they're not ground truthed. That yes, there is a shift towards more efficient irrigation as pressure goes on water resource and more awareness in regards to those sort of systems and less reliance on what we would call wasteful type irrigation, which is your water dike and flood irrigation. You will note though there's a degree of error in your 7,000 increase because, as I say, it's a desktop, it's not being ground truthed. That sort of finer detail may have to come later.
Oh, I see. So it's gone up 7,000, but the error is about 7,000. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in some cases, in one case, the unknown is quite a big amount because they can't tell what system.
Yeah.
So those sort of things will be better, obviously going forward, things that are better known.
And just finally, Mr. Chair, so, and when just reaffirming what you mean by efficiency, you know, you're
I think it's useful just to note that we don't regulate what type of irrigation people use. We've got a very small efficiency lens through Aqualink, which works out how much water per hectare you don't need. But so all of these systems are legitimate and lawful and established. And I think that's just a really important point to make.
yeah, no, and I wasn't trying to intimate that it wasn't. I was just trying to understand the implications of it. And efficiency is getting more, any water you want to use, it's landing up in the right place, and also a cost factor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I can give you one anecdote. For example, in the lower Waitaki Plains, there's been quite a shift from flood to pivot.
Yeah.
And one of the effects of there is the groundwater table's actually lowered a little bit because there's less sort of, I suppose, loss through the soil column into the aquifer.
Yes.
And in other parts of the country, such as Canterbury, they actually see an increase in nitrogen in the groundwater as a result of that change because there's essentially less flushing from the flood irrigation. So that's one of the potential effects of the changing types.
Okay. Hey, thank you. That's interesting information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Gary?
Yeah, I'm not sure irrigators would be happy with that degree of efficiency with 20, it's about 20%. I suppose is all sitting in the unknown aspect of it, but because it's a desktop exercise, then you're working off aerial photography or satellite imagery, I guess. And as we get more LiDAR and more of that, we might get more accurate, maybe. I'm having trouble bringing up the layer map for within the system, so it's either so big it's not downloading or whatever. But so my concern with the table is that Otago would look to be having an increase in hectares when we'd through Plan Change 7 and others, then there had supposedly been there was to be no extra hectares until we got to a point with long-term consents and other catchment forward directions. So I guess we really need to be highlighting the degree of accuracy that's not in this table, don't we? That it's quite inaccurate and it's going to take quite some time to get to actual factual hectares here.
Yeah, I think a lot of the net increase in area is due to mapping improvements, not actual expanded irrigation on the ground.
Yeah, and what must also be happening is Lucerne getting mistaken for irrigated areas. I mean, from aerial imagery, I'm not sure how you could see K-line and other sort of much smaller type irrigation systems other than it looking green. I don't know how you'd see it.
Yeah, certainly pivots are easy to map, the big green circles, but some of the other systems are a bit more nuanced there.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Elliot?
Yeah, I was actually just wondering, with these, because we've got 6 different land uses for all the soil monitoring sites, I'm just wondering if there's like a reason we don't compare them all to like native forest as a land use or something as a baseline.
That's in line for next year. We've just got DOC concessions to sample DOC estate, which would be a really useful baseline.
Brilliant.
Peter, is there intention to expand the soil health monitoring sites to the more nuanced ones in the near future?
Yeah, currently I think we're at 37. It's about year 3 of the program. End goal is 100 plus. So just keep adding sort of 15, 20 each year as resources allow. And some of them will be almost be coming up to be resampled again. So yeah, there's definitely, we know there's some gaps that we need to expand into some geographic areas.
So yeah, so there's a lot, so it's being broken down a bit into land use as well with some of the stuff. So how many test sites for an individual land use would you need before you can actually gain a decent picture?
We've done the exercise. It's sort of, you break it down by soil type, land use, climate. So we try and capture a range of all of those parameters. The actual, whether you want 8 poorly drained dairy farms, for example, I couldn't tell you a specific number, but we're basically trying to get it as representative as we can. Yeah.
Oh, we'll go.
Yeah, do you?
Oh, no, and the other one I was going to ask is because you've been doing your soil health monitoring stuff and visual assessment stuff, which I think is really awesome. I mentioned that at our pre-meeting, but I just wondering, have you done very many of those visual assessment sites, like, you know, a couple of years apart, or is it we just at the very just doing our first ones now?
We're just rolling out. Each site's new at this stage. Typically, you potentially resample every 4 to 5 years, depending on the land use. So probably in a couple of years, we'll be starting to go around again.
Yeah. So Lloyd, the actual soil quality measurements that are, I guess, done across the country were more around quality, so more of the fertility type measurements. So the soil biological measurements, as Eric has said in his report, it's only just starting nationally as well. So there's no NEMS type standards as such, and that's developing amongst the various councils and the land forum as well. So it's an area where all of a sudden the scientists are realising that they need that data because it reflects slightly a different set of, I guess, focuses than what was the standard quality measurements that were done and have been done up to now. So yes, that's an ongoing bit of work that will continue, and we've only just started and we'll continue with that. Is that answer that?
Yeah, no, that's good, Mark, isn't it? And I think the answer is it's only just started.
Yep.
And I think, but what I would like to say or comment, I guess, is that it's awesome that it has started, and because you've got to start to actually get the information. And once we can start tying up the biological nature of the soil and the nutrient nature of the soil and how they interact with each other, we're going to be able to work out better ways of managing it as well.
Just to add to that, exactly part of doing the biological measurements is it's giving us better information to infer some of the changes before we used to measure the change and it happened. So in this case, you are in front of the curve instead of behind.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you. I've got Kate and then Kevin.
I just talk about efficiency, and I mean, it's one that always concerns me because we talk about the actual method of irrigation rather than the environment. And just checking when we do this and understanding, are we also looking at the other conditions that are around those areas to understand better, like, and the one that always concerns me is shelter. Because there's no point putting water onto an area that's just going to be blown away in high winds. So that has a factor of your soil health as well. And I'm just wondering if when you're looking at mapping just the irrigated method, are you looking for any other changes that may have changed in that environment as well, like putting in shell birds?
Not today, no.
Right.
This.
Yeah.
Sorry, flashing.
I know that the paper isn't on efficiency, I get that, but it seems to be, there's a whole lot of factors that can be taken into account when you do.
I think this, all of, you see a range of different papers from the science team today, and all of them eventually fit together to be able to give you a kind of forward picture of what
Okay.
It's not supposed to be,
Specific, yeah.
paddock specific or anything like that. But it does give us a good picture, and you'll note the 6,000 odd hectares of estimated area in the data set. We can do better, but we'd have to invest quite a lot of effort and money and all that sort of stuff. And we wouldn't necessarily be using, we would be using that data set to estimate what level of efficiency was occurring when we're undertaking that task. But at that time, we'd look at soil, topography, and water quality and a range of other aspects to kind of pull that picture together. But at this stage, this is just about giving us one data set to input to that task.
And the question that follows from that, and it was discussion over the long-term plan, is how important LiDAR might be to some of that information, because we've made the decision to, it won't be happening next year, but it will be happening soon. How does that build into that picture?
I'm a huge fan of LiDAR. It's probably based my PhD on LiDAR, actually.
Instantly you got excited there.
For the irrigation work mapping, it's probably not as critical as satellite and infrared maps, for example. But for a myriad of other uses, it's invaluable.
But yeah. And the last one, and it's probably trivial, maybe a Scott issue really, but seriously, did the person in the photo whose hand is on page, I have never seen a worm that big. Number B.
Small hand.
A small hand, surely, that is huge. Did we seriously have earthworms in New Zealand that big?
You do.
I can confirm that is a normal human sized hand.
Well, there's nothing possible in the thousand.
Come to the good land.
That is incredibly big, is it? Yeah.
You'd actually need to go to a dairy farm to find ones like that.
I'll get Eric to stick his hand next to a roller and send you a photo.
Is that Eric?
It's an awesome photo.
Well, we got a little bit on past here.
Doing something for everyone today.
Oh, I've got Kevin and Kevin, you're next.
So looking at the soil testing, and so if I just go to the Waitaki Plains, where it looks as though might have one or two sites. Oh no, we might not even be on the Waitaki Plains actually. But just quickly for Brian, there's 20,000 hectares there irrigated that the majority of it, I'd say 15 years ago, say 20 years ago, was border dyke. And now within, I think we've got 2-3 more years and the whole lot has to be either it's going to be spray irrigated. So it's quite a dramatic change there. So as that process is going on, and speaking with people that are doing that process, there's a heck of a lot of them are actually doing VRI, which is variable rate irrigation, and they're assessing all their soils and soil types and everything anyway. And so what work are we doing with existing soil testers to increase our base knowledge of what's actually happening? But I mean, just, because what we could be doing is it could be actually surplus when other people are doing it. We could perhaps capture that either as a part of a consent or part of just a goodwill gesture sort of thing.
Yeah, so you might recall that there's funding in year one of the LTP to scope out how we start to pull this information in, and it's across a whole range of things. And that's exactly the sort of information we talked about in relation to highly productive land. It's in relation to a whole lot of stuff. So that would be the mechanism to try and understand how we can pull that stuff in. We don't want to do it if someone else has done it.
No. And just there's so much of that being done now. And if I go, you can go back 20 years when a lot of it was done. And even before the RMA went in, there was a whole lot of that sort of stuff. So there's people doing all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure they would not have issues with, the good people won't have issues with sharing that, I'm sure. So it would be great to, it's good that work's going to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Brian?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick one. You're mapping all the health of the soils and the productivity. Has anybody ever done an assessment of how productive the productive soils are? Or maybe that's something for the future. We've got a finite amount of land.
Right, no, it's not me. I'm not. Going with that one.
I'll just leave it with you. At some point, somebody will ask that question of food shortages or whatever. Are we getting the right bangs for the bucks?
Where's the curve?
Yeah, there has been, Brian, some degree of pastoral productivity on certain soil types that one can recall. I doubt that there's been a strong correlation between soil biological health and productivity, other than recognising some quality factors in relation to productivity, which is mainly pastoral based. So an answer, not a lot, no. And some of that work is starting to be developed now.
Yeah.
Just quickly, Kate, the earthworm, it's probably male, big, fat and lazy. All the really good ones are on Lloyd's farm, which are very small earthworms, which are very productive. They're probably female.
Thank you.
Mark knows where the good dirt is.
Gotta move up.
Do we have any other questions? I've just got one question, one last question, just around your soil, and it's probably not a fair question to be honest, but around your soil health parameters. So your soil health, like ability to retain water and release nutrients and hold carbon, etc. Is there any one real simple test that people can do that gives a good indication of where their soil is sitting at?
So in short, Lloyd, no, as I say, they've just started to do that. So there's a lot of things around gaseous diffusion. There are a lot of aspects around soil biological health, which they haven't quite. We know a lot about the soil quality measurements, the physical type measurements and how they relate. So that is only starting now in terms of microflora, meso, and the whatever. You'd be aware earthworms as a measurement of the biological health, and obviously some of the soil quality factors that affect their numbers. But again, we don't, they vary seasonally, they vary in regards to the type of, whether it be a drought or such like. So in answer, we're only just starting to develop those, what we call soil dynamic measurements, and Landcare and other research organisations are starting to develop that suite now, so that we'll understand it.
Yeah, it's just about that.
And I've gone green, I'm red.
That'll be tough for a dairy farmer.
Because I've always found the infiltration rate as being a pretty easy system that's really able to do, and also clarity, in tubes, like doing, because I'm a bit into dirt. And another question, and I may have missed it, but as part of our the new soil monitoring, do we including measurements for carbon?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, I may have missed that one. So awesome. We'll go to Kevin.
Just from previous work that the RRC is doing and still doing, I think that the easiest way to test your soil is take a pair of cotton undies and put it in the ground, and it's called EnviroScores, and it's soil undies, and we've been doing it for years. So if you want to check out the quality of your soil, put a pair of cotton undies in that good dairy farm of yours down south, and we'll soon tell you. So, and it works.
Thank you to some fine gentlemen in the Waitaki. We got buried undies all around the place. Sorry, we're getting off track again. Yeah, I'm
happy to see you.
Can I make one? If you're going to move, just I know it's not normal, but I just want to take a chance while Mark's here, and obviously Eric's not, but also Ben, just to give a plug to the team that do this science work. So we had a event yesterday, the Thompson's Catchment Project put on by the Manaheta Care Catchment Group, that we had some staff attend, and there was Jim Moyer, I'm not sure if I'm saying that surname right, from Lincoln University. Was the guest speaker at that event, and I guess this is also for council just to show what your support and investment in that science program is starting to lead to. So Jim, the report we've got back, Jim, was full of praise for ORC's work. I think Eric might have been liaising on some of this, and the soil water fact sheets and the related content in the land part of our website, and very positive about the direct interactions he's had with Eric and the team. and feedback that the new ORC soils web content was the best of any regional council in New Zealand. So we're starting to get some really good results, and really speaks to the hard work of our team, and obviously the support they're getting from the web team and our communications and marketing as well. But to get that from someone who's obviously very well respected in the field is really positive. So I just thought I'd take the chance to share that with council, with the committee as well.
Thank you for that. Moved Gretchen, seconded Kevin. You'd like to say something?
I would. It would not be fair to say so positively about previous speakers and then not say how positive this work is, because absolutely fantastic as well. And Richard summed up some of that. But yeah, the importance of soils to a region, can't be overstated, sorry. It's it's there in paragraph 8 about what healthy soil is all about for a region, and we need it to sustain ourselves going forward, not just in terms of agricultural production or primary production. That's really important. No, we need to have healthy soils. There's other things there like flood mitigation, carbon storage, supporting biodiversity, filtering, storing nutrients, storing those waters and gases. Really, really important, and something that perhaps we've had a bit of a gap for a while as a regional council and we're building up again, building up stronger than ever as well, I think, which is fantastic. And Tom summed it up before too, that this is really important in its own right, but is also part of a jigsaw puzzle of once we have all of the jigsaw puzzle pieces, then instead of the snapshot state of the environment type report, you can have a state of Otago environment report that brings everything together into that jigsaw. And as well as that, the stuff that's been spoken about earlier around modelling and the parliamentary commissioners' comments around regional councils, and the power of modelling, but also our ability to deliver it. At the moment, we're not quite there, but we've certainly got the pieces all coming together that are going to mean that we will be there. We've got land use and irrigated area are just a couple of examples, and we can build on those. This is just a start. The healthy soils as well, and coupling that, for example, with water quality, we'll be able to have a huge amount of power there, coupled with some other stuff as well. And where are we at, and how can we best get to where we want to be as well? So well done once again. It's fantastic to have your skills in the council, and to Eric, wherever Eric is at the moment. Really appreciate this work.
Thank you, Gretchen. Kevin, do you want to say anything?
Look, yeah, a really good piece of work. Soil is absolutely, thanks, Gretchen. Look, our soil is absolutely critical, and I'd encourage anyone that's walking around any piece of land to pull out a wee shovel, as long as it's not your good lady's lawn, is to actually have a look in that soil and see what it is all about, because it is, you can learn so much. It's been identified by government department that there's 500,000 hectares of land within New Zealand that's suitable for vegetable production, and 250,000 hectares of that's in Otago because of the soil quality and the availability of water. And I would never ever be scared of that, but what I would be encouraging is that we really understand those soils and what we can do with the water, and what and be very sure that we're not damaging our environment. And if we understand our soils and understand how to use that water, it's just superb. So no, it's great work, and yeah, we must have a lot of lazy fat male worms, because there's plenty big ones like that in North Otago. So well done, team. Thanks for the report. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd just like to come in also to say thanks to Ben and Eric, and thank Eric as well, and Mark on board. I know, talking with Eric around a few meetings, he's pretty passionate. So I can see we've got Ben, Eric and Scott all very passionate about what they're doing, and it's really, and they're actually starting to, leading in their areas, which is really awesome to see. And you don't know what you've got until you actually know what you've got, get out there and measure it. So well done. Credit credit to yourselves and to our organisation. Thank you very much. So, without any further to do, we'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Ben. And our last paper for today is contract recreation paper. Hopefully we've got Helen's joined us.
Yeah, so where Helen's been with us for almost 2 years, 18 months-ish. Sort of, but yes. But it's the first time she's written, so she took some time off to grow a human in that space as well. So it's going to talk this paper.
Yeah, enough. So Helen's topic for today is Helen's reporting on the 20 river and 16 coastal sites that are monitored for recreational activity, swimming, etc., etc. So it's a good report. We'll let you step us through it, Helen.
Yeah. So yeah, as you mentioned, this paper summarises our contact recreation monitoring program, which monitors fecal indicator bacteria and potentially toxic cyanobacteria across 36 sites over the region. The report summarises results for the 2023-24 summer bathing season. I will take the paper as read, but I would also like to acknowledge the contribution of our hardworking and highly experienced environmental monitoring team and also the data team, as well as the contributions of our communications and pollution hotline teams, which do support the delivery of this program during the season. And I would welcome any of your questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Helen? Gary?
Yes. Can I take you to in the discussion in the third bullet point, sorry, in paragraph 19. So this is a really concerning statement. It basically, like the report highlights, the situation over the season. This statement here apportions blame, and what it says is that the Manuherikia results are the result of irrigation bywash. Now, I really would like to understand why bywash has been honed in on. I would assume if bywash has been honed in on, then what that says is that sampling has been taken at the bywash points of the irrigation schemes, so that somebody has gone to where the schemes have specific points that they bywash out of the system. And so they're a necessity of the schemes. They are required from a scheme flow infrastructure perspective. But what that says is that the race systems are contaminated to a point that it has been measured and recorded. And that is the source or reason for the results in the Manuherikia. So it immediately points blame to those irrigation company directors for those results. And so has there been sampling or testing done at those bywash points?
So I can speak to that. What we see in the Manuherikia is that we get high E. coli levels both after rainfall, which is really typical. It's what we see across most sites. If it rains a lot, we get high E. coli, and that's why one of our primary messages across the season is not to swim directly after rainfall. But what we see in the Manuherikia is also elevated levels when the river's really low and low for extended periods. And what we know is that during those times when it's dry and when the river is low, there's lots of irrigation going on and there's lots of movement of water through the catchment in a really complex way, particularly in the Manuherikia where you've got the various races and irrigation systems going. So we've said that that's likely related to irrigation bywash because we know that's what's happening during those times. We have also talked about needing to go in and do some additional sampling to really hone in on where those sources might be and whether there's any management actions that could be taken to improve the E. coli levels during those low flow periods.
So we are really saying this is a generalization, like we don't actually have facts or samples taken at those key bywash points that those directors are responsible for, because decisions are being made about, irrigation schemes have supported the low flow, because we've had worst season in 40 years. In this last low flow season, Falls Dam was drawn down to empty. It was drawn down into a lower level than empty, because there is such a thing as a lower level than empty with Falls Dam. And so, you know, there was a lot of concern across the community. And then so when a statement like that is made, then that immediately puts a direction back to the directors of those companies.
I think the purpose of that statement is more about suggesting that there's a known cause that sits within that wider catchment. We all know that irrigation occurs within the Manahiriki. We, with a reasonably high degree of confidence, can point to some effects you typically see from irrigation schemes of the same age and type as the schemes that are present in the Manahiriki. And they typically relate to some level of bywash and some level of bywash contamination. And then when we sample in this place, we get results that correspond to that. So while this is a generalisation and it's a discussion point, but it's also reasonably likely to be accurate. And it's just a general statement, nothing more than that.
Are you mixing up bywash with runoff, though?
To be fair, we probably are, and the statement probably relates to all irrigation activity that results in
bywash is a very closed terminology. It's it's an official terminology for water that is picked up out of a river. It runs through a scheme, and the bywash term means that the scheme has turned water back. It either hasn't been able to, for whatever reason, it's got a flow left in a race, and it has been diverted back into the system. That's totally different to a runoff perspective, or the runoff situation, which is contour flood type, where you end up with a culmination, a collective volume that ends up back into the system. Should that bywash word be, because by putting bywash there, you immediately implicate the directors of the irrigation companies.
I think it means a generalisation, you're correct, and potentially that could be runoff and bywash. It just means the irrigation water that's moving around the catchment during that time.
So you're still saying bywash?
Well, because we, like you were saying, we haven't got the specific data points to say, so it is a generalisation, but I could accept that we could put runoff there as well, or instead of.
Yeah, equally, we could generalise that terminology to say irrigation related activities, and it would still mean the same thing, but with a more general lens. But the intention was not to point fingers at anyone in particular, was rather to acknowledge that there was a set of activities occurring in a place that likely, more than likely, had a link to some of the results that are presented in this report.
And it does. And that's the problem, that it does point fingers.
Yeah, we acknowledge that, and I think and could happily change the language.
Well, I would, it's up to you. If you're blaming bywash, then the companies will have a concern with that. And so, you know, I'll give you an example. That the water in a scheme is picked up, travelled down a race, and across it's probably in that race for 1 to 2 days. So if we're saying that water is contaminated within that race for that short period of time, then we're saying there's a contamination issue within that race. I can assure you that's not the case. So then if it's runoff, and then we're using, so if we can say, actually it's not bywash, we've got the term, if it's runoff, then in this season, predominantly, like we were down to 25% across the Manahiriki catchment for a fair chunk of the season. So then the schemes were supporting the river as much as they possibly could, but Falls Dam was drawn down. Water came out of Falls Dam, that is, you know, the lower levels of the dam. So when we say that, like we say that the FST indicates ruminant, and then in brackets we're saying and avian sources. So then is there a calculation of the proportion that and avian, like are they and even in brackets, so we're saying that ruminant is a far greater proportion of this and it's slightly a minute amount is avian, or do we know that?
No, I don't think so. And look, the purpose of this report is to share the results of a contact recreation program, a bathing monitoring program, right? Not to investigate all of the possible sources and effects and you know, all the things that are causing those effects that are measured. But in the discussion, I think it's fairly pointed out that there's a number of activities that are occurring upstream that have likely had a bearing on the results that have been seen at Shaky Bridge. So I think, and I totally take your point, and we'll look at adjusting that language around biowash. But on the whole, the purpose of the report is just to outline that there has been some high results received in this place, and that's not unusual relative to other years as well.
Yeah, but see, for the super dry, like the river was low for a long period of time, the Omakau outfall was operating away as it always does. Dilution wasn't the solution as it is often. You know, they were doing dye testing. We were seeing dye appearing in some of our structures. We believe we can see moss on the concrete that was changing colour. So this type of stuff in this report, when it's just supposed to present the results, becomes quite inflammatory when the community reads it. That's the point or the question I guess I'm asking is why go to that extent in a report like this?
So the NPCFM directs us to investigate the source of fecal contamination. So based on all the information we have available, that's our understanding of the situation. And also, I would reiterate what Tom said, that this isn't a new pattern for the Manihere Kia.
Right.
So this is kind of what we see in the Manihere Kia, and that's also reflected by the long-term grade for the contact recreation site at Shaky Bridge.
But we're happy not to identify those other things like the Omakau outfall and the those other potential contributing factors in this year, like false dam. Sorry, I know I'm labouring this point, but it's a critical one to my community.
So,
I think I understand the line of questioning, Gary. I think rather than trying to get to the bottom of this now, take the point that if we're going to draw any form of conclusion, we need to be careful with the language that we use. And it is a job to take the expertise that we've got and apply some thought to what the cause of these issues might be. But I do take your point that we need to be very careful in the language that we use in those reports. And if they are conclusions based on our assessment, as in the, you know, rather than based on testing, then we need to be clear in that, so we can go away and have a think about how the language that we use in these reports in the future and the consideration we give to all of the factors that might influence these results. I don't think we're going to answer it today, but I think your point is well made and something for us to think about for those future reports.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've got Elliot and then Kate.
Yeah, so just reading through this, the sort of end point for us is telling the public what rivers, you know, are swimmable and stuff. And I know that gets put on the lower website and sent to order if they're going to do any health announcements or whatever. I'm just wondering, is there any comms role that we do, or do we just pass it off to those networks and they do that sort of side of it?
No, we lead comms efforts through our Facebook page and social media channels, and also through our website. So we use our website for notifying toxic algae sites and warnings.
On top of the lower and health.
On top of lower and the notifications. Yeah.
Sorry, we're just working on when we're ending.
We've got another brief starting at 2:45, so just noting that.
Look, I just have one question, and it was taking this a different way. If you look at Otago, and we put as one of our strategies, we want rivers to be safe and swimmable. And yet, if I look at Otago and the number of sites on the map, there are actually very few monitored sites. Do we have any plans to add any monitoring sites, and therefore it would actually possibly address some of the issues that have been raised today as well?
Interestingly enough, Councillor McCall brought this up when we briefed him the other day, and my recollection is we reviewed the swimming or contact rec sites around about 2018. We are doing a monitoring network review and coming up in the next financial year, so that will pick up those things and we'll be able to retest whether we're testing the right things in the right place.
Yeah, I'll leave it to that.
Yeah, I think we have added a few, but I would just point that they are very resource intensive in terms of what's required to meet the standards to be classed as a contact recreation site for Lawas. So, you know, we've just been through the LTP and we know what the outcome of that was. And so when we do add these sites, they are very valuable to the community, and it's a really a positive service to provide for people that are using waterways, but it comes at a resource and cost. So something that obviously we need to balance, but I'm pretty sure we did add a couple recently, and then we had a chance to review that in the future.
Helen knows something.
Oh, there were 2 new sites this season, just been.
Thank you.
Thank, excuse me. It's a frog. They're one of those extinct ones. I will bring it to a close here. I think so. Does anybody like to move that we note the report? You got Elliot and Kate move the second. Any discussion? Once again, Gary.
Yeah, look, I mean, I always take these reports as actually a noting, like we just mentioned sediment previously. The swimmability report is another really good one for the community to, as they gauge their waterways, and it's how, often for a lot of the community, it's how they most engage with their river is the fact that they swim in it. And that certainly in Central Otago is incredibly popular. And I think given we've had such a dry season, year on year, we see these results where there's an awful lot of green in that box, and then there's some smatterings of red, and then there's some issues where we've had some caution advised, and then in the caution advised, there may still be something that may not, it's individual choice. But by and large, it should be to the credit of the people of the catchments highlighted that by and large, it is a good outcome. You know, it'll change year on year, but year on year, we do tend to have just those little highlights of red and colour at the edge. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Any other comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Right.
Yes. Gary, thank you very much, Helen, for presenting that to us. And I think that brings to close the meeting. So thank you everybody for your participation. And I'll just finish off with the karakia, ao ki te arangi, ao ki te whenua, ao ngā mea katoa. Peace to the sky, peace to the